Keeping the real Reformation alive, one topic at a time. Doth protest, doth protest, doth
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Doth Protest, a podcast on Reformation history and theology. James and I are here. We are starting today. It's just James and I, no guest. I kind of put out earlier in this season, this year, what we're going to be doing more episodes where he and I just talk about a topic of interest, historical, uh, theological, and pretty much always reformational. And we decided we were going to do a series, a multi-part series. So this is the first of several parts on the English Reformation. Something we've touched on here and there in the show. We've done zeroed in on one person or topic, crammed there a lot, for instance, in the podcast before, but we're going to kind of just narratively, chronologically work our way through the English Reformation. It'll be an overview, but we intend to make this multi-part, so we will probably get into the weeds here and there on certain uh, parts of the English Reformation. But welcome, James. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me too. I mean, obviously, we are direct theological descendants of the English Reformation, and so it's certainly meaningful for us as Episcopalians, as Anglicans. So it definitely is worth our time to do a pretty in-depth look at this.
Yeah, probably overdue. But um and I should mention that for people, I always got to be cognizant of if there's people tuning in for the first time. James and I were, of course, the hosts of this podcast, and we're both Episcopal priests in the Anglican Communion, and so we're both Anglican priests, and this is our heritage really. And on that note, you know, we're I well, we're basing this. Listeners can't see it because we're an audio only podcast, but this is based on basically a course several day course that I taught as a teaching assistant a couple of years ago in my own doctoral program. And James and I are basically just looking at all the, and they're not lecture notes. It was actually in the form of a slideshow. We're just going to go to each one, and I'll introduce it, present it in some way in audio form, however y'all will, how we're going to do it, how y'all are going to hear it on here. And then James and I will just get into further discussion for a lot of them. So, and trust us, it'll be good. We hope. So, and where we're going to first start is on the topic of Anglican. Before we get into the history, the topic of Anglicanism, and this has come up on the show before, and I don't want to spend more than like 10 minutes. I mean, maybe if we can just do this in 5 minutes, the next 5 minutes, I want to do it because I want to, Anglicanism today, as we've shared on the podcast before, Anglicanism, people might have different ideas in their head when they think of that word or Anglicanism or Anglican Christianity. Obviously, it's a global communion comprised of, I think it's like 100 million now. I mean, it continues to
I
grow in certain areas of the world, like Africa.
think it's like between 80 and 90 last I had checked, but it might have
Yeah.
gone up.
And it's grown. And I mean, it's in the US and in Western Europe, it's declined overall. Um, and that's a whole story in itself. But, it's so, people may point be like, oh, look, Anglicans, they're irrelevant. It's like, well, you're in a very Western perspective if you're thinking that way because it's growing like a lot of religion and religious expressions are growing in the developing world. And
Yeah,
Anglicanism is larger now than it was in 2000,
right.
It will continue to grow, I think, for the foreseeable time. But especially when we look at kind of Anglicanism overall, there's sometimes there's three wings or three, quote unquote streams of Anglicanism uh, that are, we're not saying we claim this, but it is often said, it's often thought of, a lot of, you know, scholars or commentators when they speak of Anglicanism present it as if there's different expressions of Anglicanism, like there's a variety of it, and they kind of boil it down to three different streams. I already see James getting mad over there. Uh, but we're going to go through these. Whether we think it's a valid way of speaking of it, I mean, James, you feel free to comment all you want on that part, because I'm like-minded with you on that. Um, but I
Well,
want to talk.
I think part of what we should say from the outset, and this is maybe I'm just feeling charitable today, but the best way to deal with these three different areas is to present them in the best possible light,
Yeah,
so that when we disagree with two of the three, um, we'll
yeah.
we'll have the strongest possible argument in
Hmm.
support of our position as well. I mean, that's just basic argumentation, but it's worth our time to do that too, because
Yeah.
like it
And
or
I,
not, these three streams exist.
right. I'm all about that way of doing it. A charitable read one, objections next. And good faith arguments. It makes an argument good faith when you can articulate what they would say about themselves and be like, but this is why I don't see it your
Right.
way. The first wing is the Anglo-Catholicism, and I'm just going to present these on how they're presented in a book called Love's Redeeming Work, which is a great book, by the way. I'll put a link in the show notes. Rowan Williams and two other people are the editors, but Rowan Williams, of course, stands out because he was a former Archbishop of Canterbury in recent times, and he's a academic theologian. And the Love's Redeeming Work was a compilation of just excerpts from Anglican writers over the centuries. I used it time to time in putting this presentation together, just because it goes from John Donne to Richard Hooker to C.S. Lewis, Dorothy Sayers, all these voices of Anglicanism. But anyways, the intro talks about these three streams, the intro of that book, and the intro that we're doing here as well. So the first of these three wings of Anglicanism is Anglo-Catholicism. Anglo-Catholics, quote, stress the concern of 16th and 17th century Anglicans to preserve the forms of ministry handed down from the earliest days of the church and their sense of spiritual and sacramental continuity with the early church fathers and the faith of the quote undivided church unquote. Quite often Anglo-Catholics will add that the feverish intensity of the period distorted the proper character and calling of the Anglican Church by allying it to various Protestant principles that were really extraneous to the central business of creating a reformed non-papal Catholicism. Did I leave a part out there for some reason?
No, no, that makes sense.
Okay, it does make sense. Okay.
Yeah,
What were they saying was what were, according to Williams, Anglo-Catholics will add that the feverish intensity of the 16th and 17th century. Okay, so
right.
Okay. Anglo-Catholics look on the 16th and 17th century and they believe it, may have gone too far and it's allying with what they call
Exactly.
Protestant principles. Okay.
It's a yes,
Um,
but. It's a yes,
a
but. So,
yes, but so now that we, I guess, charitably read Anglo-Catholicism, I guess what would would you have any objections to that? Or just would you have further comments to say that you think are helpful?
yeah, so the way that Anglo-Catholicism tends to self-express is that it views Anglicanism as a kind of middle way between Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. It believes that Anglicanism, Protestants say um, we have the corner on the early church, or at least we have a direct link to the early church, justification by grace through faith alone. Roman Catholics would say we have the market cornered on the early church because we're direct descendants of them. Well, Anglo Catholics will say that we being Anglo Catholics, although I'm not one, we actually have the right way of thinking because Roman Catholicism goes too far in one direction, Protestantism goes too far in another direction. So we are a kind of tertia quid, a third thing.
Mm.
Um, that's that's their argument. And if you want to add anything else, great.
No,
Otherwise, we can
I
start
think
dismantling.
we said enough about it. I mean, there's but my yeah, I would say yeah, we've spoken a lot in the past, but just to kind of um I'll start with it, my objections to what they claim. I think it's often they get Protestantism. Well, I wouldn't say they get Protestantism wrong. Often they get the Reformers wrong. Anglo-Catholics. Anglo-Catholics get they haven't read deeply into Luther's thought or theology. They haven't read deeply into Calvin's thought or theology. And they have a very limited view of what oftentimes they do. Some aren't, but many of them have a very, I would say, just an inaccurate understanding of what Protestant, at least 16th century Protestant theology and 16th century Protestant principles were. Not that that's a monolith in itself, because you had the different branches of the Reformation. You had the Lutheran branch, the Reformed branch, which runs a spectrum from Calvin to Zwinglian theology, and then you had, of course, the radical Reformation. I think a lot of Anglo Catholics kind of collapse all of that into what we would see descendant from the radical Reformation, which is kind of the
Yeah.
more the more the very far extreme Protestantism. They a lot of them would, I think of a lot of Anglo Catholics actually read Luther, especially reading him in, well, they didn't even need to read. I would say that I could, you could point Anglo Catholics to like kind of that school of Luther scholarship that saw Luther as very much a medieval person, not a modern person, very much as someone harvesting the fruit of the High Middle Ages, and in that way being one of many valid streams of Catholicity. That's all great stuff, but I wouldn't even point an Anglo-Catholic to reading that to see that they would actually resonate a lot with Luther or find a lot in common. They could go right to Luther's works and come across a lot of just great stuff, I think. They'd realize, wow, it was kind of like when we had Mickey Maddox on the show, or you weren't on that episode, James. That was when with Stephen and I, when we talked with Mickey Maddox, he said, Mickey Maddox, he's a Catholic professor of church history and theology, and he had a Catholic student one time who just couldn't stop reading Luther, and the guy was like, the person was like conflicted about it, like he was like inside he was feeling like torn, like I shouldn't be reading Luther, but I'm really drawn to him. He sounds like an early church father to me. And Mickey Maddox, who's, again, not a Protestant, he's a Roman Catholic. He's like, yeah, that's Luther is good and right on a lot of things, and that's exactly right. So, yeah, I it's in our world of popular Catholic apologetics, Roman Catholic apologetics. I'm not even on TikTok, but I see some of these guys.
Mhm.
I say people, but I mean most of them are guys, uh, arguing kind of these cheap Roman Catholic polemics that we've been hearing
Mhm.
since for 500 years now, echoing them. Just it's really just they make cheap shots at Protestantism and at the reformers, and you can just tell they're just not well acquainted with the writings of the reformers. They didn't even really understand what those people were about. It's kind of sad. And I know I kind of got off topic a little bit, but Anglo-Catholics, I find some Anglo-Catholics buying into the same lines as
Mhm.
having the same attitude as some of these, cheap popular Roman Catholic polemics when it comes to the Reformation. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I would add to that. I would say so. One more thing to say about the first generation of Anglo Catholics is that they were men of erudition.
Mhm.
They were, in their own right, patristic scholars. Newman was a patristic scholar. Edward Pusey was a patristic scholar. I have a copy of his translation of Augustine's Confessions. It was actually the first copy of that I was given. Um, And so their focus is, of course, recovering their early church. But where they go astray is, for one thing, like when it comes to the early church, you're right in the sense that they I think they misread the fathers, and they misread the fathers because they haven't read the reformers deeply enough.
Mm.
Cranmer was one of the most brilliant patristic scholars of his day. Uh, and you know, part of what Bishop Ashley Noll is doing with his commonplaces, with Cranmer's commonplaces editing, is pulling together all of the places where Protestant doctrine is actually taught in the early church fathers.
Mhm.
A modern tiny volume about that is a book called Long Before Luther by a guy named Nathan Busenitz, where like in the back of the book and the appendices, it's just all the places in the fathers where they talk about justification by faith
Yeah.
alone.
And by that, you're saying it's the early church fathers weren't consciously promoting Protestant principles. That term Protestant didn't exist. They're promoting what they saw as Christian and
Exactly.
Catholic principles.
Right.
Um, and that kind of goes to my point. I think a lot of the Anglo-Catholics, I'm not the only one who points this out, that a lot of Anglo-Catholics, they might have been good patristic scholars, the first, second generation of Anglo-Catholics, but they were ignorant about, a lot of them were ignorant about the actual 16th century reformers and what they
Yeah.
thought. I'm not the only one who points that out. Michael Ramsey, who was an Anglo-Catholic himself, the Archbishop, the great Archbishop of Canterbury from the 20th century, he pointed that out, how he
Yeah.
lamented that his co-religionists didn't know Luther and Calvin. Um, but I would say that, yeah, if those early generations of Anglo-Catholics, they were striving for this like non-papal Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
If they read Luther, they realized Luther was striving for that same thing, a
Right.
non-papal Catholicism. So,
Right.
um,
Well,
yeah,
and like the problem again is with the way that they interpreted what non-papal Catholicism should look like.
sure. It's not the same thing, but
So,
yeah,
so non-papal Catholicism for Anglo-Catholics is actually basically the medieval Roman Catholic Church without a pope.
yeah,
So they're nothing more than the conservative party in the English Reformation.
hmm
And we're going to get to that, I'm sure.
yeah.
The
We'll
difference
break down
between
when we use that term conservative in that context, what we're talking about.
right,
Yeah,
right,
so
conservative versus evangelical, which
yeah,
today those two tend to be synonymous in more ways.
right. It's a whole different framework we're talking about.
Right, but
Yeah,
sticking with the topic at hand. So like if you want an exercise in special pleading when it comes to Anglo-Catholicism, read John Henry Newman's Tract 90 in the Tracts for the
Mhm.
Times. He reads the 39 articles and interprets them there in a way that is way different than they were ever intended, and in point of fact, antithetical to the way that they were intended. But he says they can be read this way. Well, I can read anything in any way. It doesn't mean it's a licit way of reading it, that
Right.
it's right
Yeah,
or
and
good.
yeah, I think any there's different theories of interpretation, but at the end of the day, I think something has to be said about like, look, yes, we are all going to hear things a certain way.
Yeah.
Yes, words can continue to live on past the time they're written on a piece of paper, but come on. If the person who originally wrote those things was articulating something that would be antithetical to now how you are interpreting it, there's just something about that. There's no, it just lacks integrity. I don't know. Is that the,
Well, I mean, so I'm sure that we'll have somebody, rage respond to this, but if memory serves,
By the
the
way, pause on that. If you want to rage respond, I still need to make an updated email for this address. I'm just gonna give you my personal email. Oh gosh, I'm gonna get spammed now. Yeah. Oh no, AI is too good now. Never mind. I will in the show notes. I will create a email account for this pod. It's something I've been meaning to do because we want your feedback, not just negative and rage. We'll accept that, but positive too and neutral, whatever. Um, or you can just like put it in your reviews you give on Apple Podcasts. But yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes with the email as well. I'm writing
Yeah,
that
we don't
down
want
so
to
I don't forget.
encourage rage reviews though. Like if you're mad, take a minute to chill before you review us.
Yeah, right.
In the article about about purgatory in the Tracts for the Times, if memory serves, Newman ends up landing that purgatory is actually a thing, according to the article, which is the exact opposite of what the article's saying.
Right. That's what we're talking about. Is like when it's like you can, there's just a certain line you cross where I just would call it misinterpretation.
Yeah,
Yeah. Let's move on to the
yeah.
next wing. All right, so we're not going to spend more than 10 minutes. But again, this could turn into a multi-part series. So, the next wing of this, we're working through the three wings. The next wing of the next stream of Anglicanism we're going to talk is called the liberal corner. Uh, and this corner, and yeah, this corner points out the way in which early Anglicans had to live with diversity, and they never bound themselves too tightly to a single confessional formula based on specific theological principles. In contrast to the Reformed churches of continental Europe, and they would probably add that the process of Reformation continues and that the doctrinal formulae still taken for granted at the beginning of Anglicanism are open for reinterpretation. I'll play the charitable person here because you are very charitable to the Anglo-Catholics. Here's me being charitable to the liberals because I used to be one. I used to be a theological, I used to be a liberal in many ways. But
And I used to be an Anglo Catholic, so
there you
yeah,
go. That's why we
yeah,
get these people, man.
yeah.
No, and I've done a lot of my studies on uh 19th century, can't even talk today, liberal theology of Germany, and it's related, but um liberal theologians basically saying they basically, if you want to know what liberal theology means, it's right in that quote I just read. It's people who don't bind themselves to really a doctrinal or confessional formula, not singularly, anyways, and they're they're very open to interpreting things in the Bible or they're open to saying certain things in the Bible. They're very accepting of historical criticism. I respect the insights of a lot of historical criticism too, but that's I consider myself post-critical. But yeah, the liberals basically they want to they kind of go in with the assumption of we know things about modern science that they didn't for back when they wrote the Bible or in many years of the history of the church. We know we have made certain progress in enlightenment as a species, and they try to see the value. They try to extract the value of religion or religions. They're not very much into they try to extract the value and kind of make it palatable for a modern person in their mind, as they would say. They're also they're not really into exclusive truth claims
Hmm.
that are I don't know. I think I explained it enough, and I would say where they're kind of right in that description Rowan Williams gave is that they do as far as like this kind of broad, you do see this kind of broadness. I mean, as far as what I would say, like the liberals claim to having an authentic to be continuing what is authentically Anglican. They do have it going for them that the early generations of Anglicans did leave a certain broadness in the ways that, like in the continent, the Reformation was very much more heated and much more factional. I mean, we had factionalism in England too, but you had people that really started form like when they got together to hash things out and debate things, and then whether they came together or not in the Continental Reformation, they always started with, all right, let's go point by point, right? Let's list out a confessional document of beliefs that we can commonly assent to, because that's what concord is. That is what, the spirit bringing us to one mind will be. And it
Yeah.
didn't always work out, of course. And in England, that wasn't always like you had the confession, you got to that point, but it was not, they weren't always, they didn't always start there.
Hmm.
Some did, some didn't, but it wasn't as obvious, I would say, in the Continental Reformation. But that said, Cranmer early on, while he was still here on this earth with us, left us a set of articles of religion
Hmm.
that he claimed were an expression of faith. And are they broad? Yeah, but are they specific? I would say they're specific too, in many ways. And so Richard Hooker was he was against kind of an extreme faction of Protestants in England who wanted to, the radical Puritan types who wanted to leave and who thought that, all these things that we do are Catholic because, wearing this certain vestment is Catholic because the Catholics do it. And Hooker was like, just because Roman Catholics may do that doesn't inherently make that Roman Catholic, etc.
Right.
And so he was like, we can leave room for lots of things, lots of a reasonable range of ways we can worship and believe about things. But I mean, you could also say that about the continent side, especially with
Sure.
Luther. He considered a lot of things adiaphora, right? You can do it
Hmm.
this way or that way. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, your salvation is not staked on a lot of things. So,
Sure.
yeah, I don't know where I guess, I don't know. What would you say about liberalism?
So the benefit that we can feel today is the openness for towards the idea of a big tent within Anglicanism, that there is a diversity of opinion that can remain in communion. And I think that there's also something that's attractive to many about this idea of a sort of mere Anglicanism, like a mere Christianity, the sort of the sine qua non of Anglicanism or Christianity, the things without which they would cease to be what they are.
Mhm.
But I think the problem is that liberalism gives too much ground.
Mhm.
Um, and you're right. So like there is a sense of like not everything is considered essential to Protestantism, to Anglicanism. There are things that are adiaphora. But the problem is that liberalism treats some of the essentials as adiaphora.
Right, right.
So like justification by faith alone is an essential,
Hmm.
right? I mean, the reason why Anglicanism exists, the reason why Protestantism exists is because we staked our claim. We were willing to die on the hill of justification by faith alone or faith only.
Hmm.
And liberalism would say, well, actually, free will and a belief in the bound will can coexist with an Anglicanism.
Yeah.
Or, you know, Anglo-Catholicism can exist in the same entity as evangelical reformational Anglicanism. And the problem with that is that it creates a kind of cognitive dissonance within Anglicanism that like you can't hold two opposing positions on the same thing at the same time.
Mm.
It's impossible. It would create cognitive dissonance. And so what it also does is it creates an identity crisis.
Mm.
And so what many people think of as one of the benefits of liberalism, this mere Anglicanism, mere Christianity, ends up creating an identity crisis where Anglicanism no longer really, understands what it is.
Well, and I would add that I think the real maybe the bigger danger I would say is not. Yeah, I get your point about the liberalism can confuse liberalism within Anglicanism can confuse what Anglicanism even is, but liberalism within Anglicanism or any form of Christianity can confuse or lose what Christianity even is. Like when your point
Right,
about mistaking things that are really essential as secondary.
right,
Like if, Jesus is the full, of equal being and of the same essence as God. who
Right.
died and rose again and forgave our sins, and he's the way, the truth, and the life. You'll find liberal Anglicans in the Episcopal Church. You find them, like who say, well, no, not really. That's just like there's different ways of understanding that he's not like the only way to salvation, or um, things that are just basic and essential to what Christians believe and ought to believe and trust in are just considered like that's just really an option now,
Yeah.
right? That's the weakness of liberalism. And I
Well,
kind of,
and
John Shelby Spong is kind of the a very crude kind of two-bit uh cheap uh version of the extremes of that.
it's liberalism
Bishop in the
taken to
Episcopal Church made a big splash 20 years ago, and I don't really hear about him anymore. But
well,
yeah,
he's
he
been
would be
dead
kind
for
of
a
the
long time.
quintessential of how that on the popular polemical level,
Yeah.
what Anglican liberalism is. I'm sorry, James, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say Spong is liberalism taken to its logical end. Um, that everything is up for grabs, and Spong would say that he has just as much a place within Anglicanism as um, as Cranmer, you know. Um, but one of the
And
things
if you were to see them side by side, if you were to put them in a debate together, that they would be like of two totally different worldviews. I mean,
right,
Cramner I mean, see this person as like so anathema. So,
right, right.
you know,
Well, and okay, so the other thing is, if you think about like the sort of the original liberalism of Anglicanism is Enlightenment Anglicanism in the 18th and 19th centuries. And in large part, that's what Anglo-Catholicism was actually responding to.
yeah, yeah,
Was a sort of relaxing of doctrine that happened with that original
yeah,
liberalism.
yeah. Deism had a strong at that time. Deism was rampant in the
Right,
Church of England, and a lot of the theologians and the clerics of the Church of England. And yeah, Anglo these things play off each other, I think, is what you're
right.
pointing out. I mean, the Anglo Catholics they weren't so much. To give them the credit, they weren't so much just merely some anti-Protestant movement in
Well,
the
and
19th
it was
century. They were moving against this the tide of of the culture and of the church at the time. So yeah.
well, and what's interesting is that it was because of a liberal perspective that the Episcopal Church never took as a confessional statement officially. I mean, 1801, the 39 Articles were taken as a sort of,
Yeah.
kind of confessional statement, but not really. I mean, Ben Crosby's talked about this bit on his Substack,
Yeah.
uh, but part of the reason why it people were so vehemently opposed was because someone like Samuel Seabury believed in free will,
Hmm.
and he didn't like the idea that the articles didn't.
Yeah.
And for him, it was necessary to get out from under that, so that Anglicanism could be seen as something quite different. And I mean, he's one of the early sort of proto-Anglo-Catholics.
Hmm.
Um, but part of why uh, we have become so, you know, confused is because the articles are actually far more attenuated, far more Protestant focused than people like John Henry Newman are willing to admit. So much so that we had to dispense with them so that we could maintain our liberalism.
Right. And I said we weren't going to spend 10 minutes on it. We spent about 20, but this is to wrap up the three streams. We're going to end with this stream because this will segue into the English Reformation. This is the evangelical wing, which, quoting Rowan Williams, emphasizes that the English Reformation was an affirmation of the absolute supremacy of Scripture in all matters affecting the church. Some would, like their predecessors in the 16th century, add that the Reformation was therefore an unfinished process and that the purifying of the church according to biblical principles must be taken further in each generation, unquote. I would add a little bit of a pushback. I would say purifying the church according to biblical principles, they don't it doesn't have to be taken further in each generation, but it often maybe could and should if the church is forgetting biblical principles,
Right.
and forgetting the message of the gospel being justified by faith alone. So, but other than that, I think it's that slight rewording. I would say that that's a good way to put it. There's obviously so much more, and I think that'll be fleshed out as we go over the English Reformation. But just to say,
Yeah.
this wing, this third of the three wings we just now went through, this evangelical wing, as it's called, is this wing of Anglicanism, which is still found in parts of the Anglican Communion, not maybe so much in the Episcopal Church, maybe here or there, but in the Anglican Communion still. This is the we see our and we are both here. I can think we can say evangelical Anglicans. We see ourselves as heirs of the English Reformation, um,
Absolutely.
because we believe we carry on the principle the we care well we believe we carry on biblical principles which we
Right.
think the English reformers stood by, like Cranmer, and Cranmer and Co.
Yeah.
The
Well,
yeah, well, sorry, James.
so I'll add to the evangelical portion of things. So, one of the things that Bishop Ashley Noll talks about in his writing is that Cranmer, if Cranmer had survived the reign of Mary, there would likely have been another iteration of a Book of Common Prayer, because the the idea that Archbishop Williams is presenting here is that the ideas and doctrines of the scriptures never change, but they're reconveyed and reinterpreted every generation, so that the same truth can be conveyed in a way that that generation can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the best of evangelicalism even to this day. That's why evangelicals, in my not so humble opinion, tend to be better biblical scholars, because
Oh,
they're trying.
I definitely agree with that. At least, not even you see in North America today. I would say in the 1950s, the best biblical scholars came out of the mainline Protestant denominations.
Right.
In the 2020s, in the 2010s, and 2000s, I would say the best biblical scholars come out of the evangelical Protestant,
Yeah.
and that's again
But
these. Yeah, I'm
And
sorry.
the watershed moment for that was Mark Noll's book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind,
Hmm.
which I think is really important. It's a really important read for folks. And it actually was a turning point for evangelicalism, because at the time when he wrote it, there was a lot of anti-intellectualism, and then there's been now a renaissance of intellectualism
Right.
within evangelicalism.
Yep.
But what I will say is that, first off, I love the fact that we've gone with these three corners or three streams, um, from the youngest to the oldest.
Is it
So
the youngest to the oldest?
yeah, so Anglo-Catholicism is the new kid on the block.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. I was thinking you
Liberalism,
said youngest to oldest, and I was thinking oldest to youngest because my brain reversed
yeah,
that. Yes,
no, absolutely not.
you're right. No, no,
But
and
but
some Anglo Catholics would be like, "No, man, we're like the first couple years after Henry, who we'll be talking about, broke
yeah,
the
no,
church
man,
off.
no, we're
Man,
we're
we're the
we're
real cat."
Cuthbert.
Yeah.
Um, but but I think also what's important to take note of is the fact that the evangelical side of this uh, has the sort of paleo Anglicanism um, down pat. Like, not just because I am a part of this, but because historically that's accurate.
I think it's
Paleo
historically,
Anglicanism.
yeah. But I think I would say even if you don't, even if you are an self-avowed Anglo Catholic, and you should, and that, fine, be that. God
Yeah,
bless you. But be historically honest, I think, when it comes to your read of Anglican history. That's a later innovation. It was not what anyone would have understood as Anglicanism until the 19th century. So,
yeah,
yeah, I guess it's the historian in me that is irked. It's not so much. I mean, I have Anglo-Catholic friends and colleagues as you do, and I mean, I get along great with a lot of them. And yeah, but it's more like the historical, you know, part. It's like, you know, but and that's important. I mean, the
yeah.
the background and story of something is matters a lot. I think it's more than just something in the past. It's something that pertains to today. So,
Yeah.
I'm now on the House of Tudor,
Before we
James.
get to the House of Tudor,
Yeah,
could I mention something that's not on the PowerPoint, but I think it's important to mention. I don't remember if you mention it later. So if you do, sorry. But I want to talk about the White Horse Inn.
we're gonna get into it.
Okay, then
It's
I'll
it's
leave
coming
it
up
be.
later. Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
leave it be. You go ahead. You go
yeah, man. Jumping the gun, man. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, no, let's talk about the House of Tudor. Everyone loves the Tudors. This
ahead.
they've done shows of you've seen the Tudors, the show.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a good
yeah.
show.
Yeah, Jonathan
Lots
Rhys
of
Davies.
blood and gore and sex.
Yeah,
So, forewarning to our good
yeah.
Christian listeners, but the it's a good show. It's gosh, maybe 10, 12 years old now. The
Jonathan
Tudors.
Rhys Myers. Jonathan Rhys Davis is the one that was in Indiana Jones.
Jonathan Rhys Davies. Yeah. Who was he
Yeah.
in Indiana Jones? I know that actor's name.
He was Sala.
Sala, yes. I
Yeah.
have a friend, if he never mind, it could be considered offensive, but if he put on like a certain top on his head, he had like the facial hair, he looked just like Sala. And then he'd talk in the accent.
Nice. Very nice.
Like,
Sorry,
didn't
go ahead.
you?
That was the diversion.
No, it wasn't. We can diverge. I mean, this is multi. I'm sure listeners enjoy us talking about Indiana Jones. No, the House of Tudor. I'm just gonna kind of walk us through all the people of the House of Tudor.
Yeah.
Not all the people. We're gonna start with Henry VIII, who's the King of England going into the 16th century, son of Henry VII, who was the first Tudor king. Henry VIII, of course, famous. Um, or sorry, paintings of him. There's probably a big painting of him in his imposing figure with his huge. I actually saw his body armor suit when I went to the Tower of London 5 years ago. They have it there encased, so I'm sure everyone who's listening who's been to the Tower of London has seen it too. He's kind of a famous or infamous king of England. I mean, a household name. I mean, he's his. It's he's his story is connected, of course, to the beginning of the Church of England as a church separate from Rome.
Yeah.
He was married 6 times to first wife Catherine of Aragon, second wife Anne Boleyn, third wife Jane Seymour, not the actress who played Dr. Quinn. You remember Dr.
Yes,
Quinn?
woman. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Uh, and Anne
Anne
of
of Cleves.
Cleves,
Yeah.
Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. And any want to comment on any of the six wives? We're going to get into three of them in a little bit, but was there any? They're all significant in a way.
They are. And uh how many of them did he have executed?
Well, there's like a poem, or not a poem, but
Yeah.
like,
Married, killed, died, married, killed, or divorced, killed, died, divorced, killed, survived, or something like that. So I
yeah,
think he
that's
killed
it.
two. Yeah.
You're right. Divorced, killed, died, divorced, killed, survived. Yes.
Yeah.
As in that's what happened to each wife.
Right. Right.
He had children. Well, I think he had a couple bastard children.
Right.
Illegitimate children. Right.
Right.
I'm here. My mind's going back to the 16th century. We just called them bastards. But he had three legitimate children, that is, children born in wedlock. And he had one child each with each of his first three wives. All would end up being monarch. It's Mary Tudor, who would be Mary the First, Elizabeth, who would be Elizabeth the First, Edward, who would be Edward the Sixth. Not in that order, of course. Edward was first, then Mary and Elizabeth. None of they had children. And a couple of them died young, as we'll get into part of why all three ended up being monarch.
Right.
Catherine of Aragon's Henry's. I'm sorry, James, you okay?
Yeah. No, you're
Oh,
good.
I said. Catherine of Aragon is Henry VIII's first wife, first married to Arthur Tudor, daughter of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella the First of Castile, cousin to Pope Clement VII. There's a couple things here that are important. Catherine of Aragon was Henry's first wife. before she was married to Henry, was married to Henry's brother, Arthur Tudor, who was the older brother, would have been ended up as king. We would have had a King Arthur, but
Hmm.
Arthur died before becoming king, leaving Catherine widowed. Henry married her, and this is what kind of precipitates Henry wanting to break the church. Henry wanted to divorce Catherine years later. This is what precipitated him breaking the church away because the Pope wouldn't grant it. Remember, we just read Pope Clement the Seventh uh, is a relative of her, so you can see why maybe he wouldn't grant a divorce. But she also she was married. Yes, she was married to Henry's brother before him, and Henry tried to appeal to Scripture to say how this was unlawful.
Right.
And he was mistaken for that. Now, I can't remember. There's a passage in Leviticus. I should have looked this up.
Yeah.
There's a passage in Leviticus and a passage in Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
One tells you not to take your brother's wife.
That's Deuteronomy, I think.
The other tells you that you should take your brother's widow.
Yeah.
Because in that time, in that tribal time of the early Israel, like they'd be destitute and you'd have to take them under your roof, so you'd be marrying them. So Henry actually was mistaken, I would argue, and so would Martin Luther, because Henry tried to get Martin's support, or Martin like wrote a nasty thing to Henry or about Henry for wanting to do this. Henry's trying to divorce his wife based on a biblical argument that is not sound, basically. Right?
Yeah. So I was backwards. So Deuteronomy is where levirate marriage uh is
Levirate,
supposed to
as
happen,
in
and then
the Levi's. Yeah.
yeah. Oh well, no.
Levites.
Levir means brother-in-law, like husband's brother.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought you meant
And
like the Levites
right.
spokesman,
So the other
because they're the
way,
priest.
yeah, in Leviticus it says you shouldn't do that. So this is actually a really
But
testy
but
issue.
the mistake here is that the passage says one passage is referring to a wife, where it says, yeah, don't take your brother's wife. Of course not. That's adultery. A
Right.
wife and a widow are two different things. That's how I read it.
So in Deuteronomy, it says, if brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her. So, like, that's legitimate.
Yeah.
Um,
Henry was literally following the law,
yeah,
the Jewish law of the Torah. Yeah.
but the Levitical okay, so I'll say this. One of the things that is so testy about the situation is first off, Henry never appealed for a divorce until after the act and restraint of appeals. Henry appealed for an annulment
Sorry. I'm
because
using
well, no,
different terminology. No,
but
that's a good point.
yeah, so like okay, so here's the situation. The situation is uh it's the Roman Church argued that since Arthur and Catherine never consummated their marriage, that they were not married. And so Henry was
Um,
given dispensation to marry Catherine. So the whole
which
argument,
that's in itself is weird.
so the
I
whole
don't.
argument hinges on never consummating the marriage. Catherine absolutely unequivocally said until she died that she never had a sexual relationship with Arthur. But they were married for 5 months before he died. And on their wedding night, Arthur comes out of their bedroom and says to one of the guards, I'm thirsty or I'm hungry. I've spent all night in Spain, which is a euphemism for saying I've been having sex with my wife.
Mhm.
So the argument for why the Pope gave dispensation for Henry to marry Catherine is because Catherine argued we never had a sexual relationship, but they did. There's really not any way to deny it.
There's no way to prove it. Well, yeah. Of course,
So,
I guess didn't they? I mean, it's weird. It's a different time, but they would there would be witnesses to the consummation. Uh, I mean, on the wedding night or something, but maybe they didn't do it then. Well, we're
Right.
really getting weeds on
Well,
this.
but no, this is important though, because what it shows is the inconsistency of medieval Roman Catholic argumentation.
Right. And the
So,
fact that if they wanted to turn Henry down, there was a much better biblical argument
yeah,
that Luther pointed out. You know, the law speaks about a widow
right.
marrying a widow is fine. I mean, there was this much a simpler way to do this, but no, it was all based on tradition and canon law and all this other later stuff that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, so to finish with this, because I think it's really, really important to understand what's going on here. The Pope viewed Leviticus 18, verse 16, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife, it is your brother's nakedness. And then Leviticus 20, verse 21, that adds to it, if a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity, he has uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall be childless.
Mm.
Henry believed that because he had taken his brother's wife, that's why all of their children died.
Sure. Yeah, and back
So,
then that would we
yeah.
would think the same thing, you and
And
I.
so Henry
Maybe, yeah.
had this actual crisis of conscience because he believed that the Pope was giving an illicit dispensation for him to be married because he believed that what he was doing was actually opposing Leviticus. Now you're right to point out that Leviticus here is actually talking about when you're still married to your brother's wife,
Mm.
or when your brother is still married to his wife and you have a sexual relationship with your brother's wife, adultery, right?
Mm.
But but for Henry, he believed, like the Pope believed, that this was talking about marrying someone who was married to your brother.
Mm.
And so that's why the Pope had to give dispensation. Henry believed that the Pope shouldn't have done it. The Pope said, I'm the Pope and can do whatever I want in that regard. And so Henry said, well, actually, maybe we need to dig down deeper about what the Pope is supposed to do and be.
Mm. Yeah.
So, like to give Henry the benefit of the doubt, he recognized an inconsistency in the argument of the Pope. He also recognized that his wife was lying because she was. Now she's a victim afterward, to be sure, because he treated her like garbage.
Mm.
But she was lying. I mean, historically, it's naive to believe that she never had a sexual relationship with her husband, especially
Yeah.
considering the evidence.
Yeah.
But um, biblically, the Pope was right, although he arrived at the right conclusion the wrong way.
Mm.
So
Okay.
that's what I would say.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's helpful context. I mean, that's yeah, and that's not normally the narrative you get in the overview. It's kind of just, but yeah, and I remember coming across those more important details that sometimes get, left out and the order of how it went too.
Yeah.
I'm going to share this quote. It's from it's a classic 20th century book text about the English Reformation. It's called The English Reformation. It's by an author named A.G. Dickens. It's considered a classic, a little bit dated, but still such a go-to as far as a history of the English Reformation goes. But I like what he says here. He says, quote, "The place of the royal divorce, that's Henry's divorce, in the history of the English Reformation will always remain a subject for argument. Protestant writers have tended to dismiss it as mere occasion rather than a genuine cause of the English Reformation. Catholics have sometimes regarded the divorce as the chief cause of the cataclysm and suppose that, had it not been pressed, England might well have remained a Catholic nation. To the present writer, neither of those views seem wholly acceptable." I have to agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I have seen how people like us, people who are like, as we'll get into in shortly, or maybe in the next episode,
Yeah.
the English Reformation really is born out of the theology of Cranmer and the English reformers, not Henry and his personal matters.
Right. Right.
And we sometimes tend to downplay that part to be like, well, Henry, he had his personal matter, but it was all in God's providence. It created the situation for the true religion to come in.
Right.
No, it was perhaps a little more than just a mere occasion. And we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, I mean, I hear it like Catholics I like come across here in Lake Charles. I'd be like, "Oh, you're the Church Henry VIII." started.
Right.
You know?
Right. That argumentation is a canard, and it's very, very common. It's a misleading story that ignores historical fact.
Hmm.
And part of what we want to do in talking about the English Reformation is to set the story straight. Like
Right.
we're after the truth, and the truth is Henry was not the founder of the English Church, and it was not because Henry wanted to get a divorce.
Hmm.
That's why I wanted to bring up the White Horse Inn because that's going to play an essential role in all this. But again, that's a
It's coming up, man.
yeah,
I know you
that's the
love the
cart
White
before the
Horse.
horse. So go ahead. Yep.
Well, we might not get it to the White Horse in today. That will come. Well, we'll see. We have like
Yeah.
20 minutes. We got 20 minutes. All right,
Let's do
right?
it.
You got 20 minutes. We
Let's
got
do it. Yep.
21 minutes. All right, let's roll. Um, Henry Tudor, later Henry VIII, received a papal dispensation in order to marry Catherine because canon law forbade marriage. Okay, now we're getting to some of the history. I'm just reading off these slides I have. That's how we're doing this podcast, as we
Yeah.
mentioned before. Um, so yes, he did receive a papal dispensation in order to marry Catherine. I think it's silly and ironic that he would need a papal dispensation because again, but anyways, they married, and in 1516, Mary Tudor, their child Mary, their daughter was born. She would later be Mary the First, who reigned later on. We'll get into. Later, Henry, due to his dalliance, I haven't said that word in a while. I don't use it every day. Dalliance with Anne Boleyn, sought to have his marriage with Catherine annulled. The Pope would not grant it to him. Anne Boleyn just kind of, she was what, one of the ladies in waiting for Catherine. She
Yep.
worked in the court, in the
Yep.
palace. Yeah.
Yep.
So she's around and Henry's looking at other women, she's around. She just comes into the picture. Um, the English court granted the dispensation in 1533, typo. My thing says 1933.
Yep.
That's when someone else came to power. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
and in 1534,
Yeah.
Henry VIII declared the Act of Supremacy. The
Right.
Act of Supremacy, of course, is, as I understand, I mean, it's the original language was that the king is the monarch of England is the head of the Church of England, or I think they later changed it, the wording, because no, I think, well, I don't remember, but it's basically in many ways, what the authority the Pope would hold over all of Western Christendom. Now he doesn't have that over England. The monarch of England has that authority.
Yeah, and that began in 1533 with what's referred to as the Act and Restraint of Appeals, which is Catherine wanted to appeal to the Pope. I get super nerdy about this. Catherine wanted to appeal to the Pope to have him finally rule on this whole annulment issue because Henry was going to go forward with regard to that, and it didn't matter what the Pope had to say. So Henry had Parliament pass the Act and Restraint of Appeals, or Parliament passed it with Henry's blessing, and that was to say that the highest authority in the land is the king.
Hmm.
The Pope um, cannot subvert the king's decision.
Okay.
So everything has to go to Henry. So of course, in that way, the Parliament's able to do whatever it wants, and by this time, Cranmer has got a hand in some of this. So the Act of Supremacy in 1534 was the nail in the coffin of Roman Catholicism in England. But it really began when Henry said the Pope has no, the Bishop of Rome has no, um,
Jurisdiction in this realm.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Well, here's the language from the Supremacy Act. Quote, albeit the king's majesty justly and rightly is and oweth to be the supreme head of the Church of England, and so is recognized by the clergy of this realm in their convocations, yet nevertheless for corroboration and confirmation thereof, and for increase of virtue in Christ's religion within this realm of England, and to repress and extirp all errors, heresies, and other enormities and abuses heretofore used in the same. They were going to say something else. I just put dot dot dot. I think where to read this? I think I quoted that. I pulled that from. It's a really important resource for anyone who's interested in studying the English Reformation. It's that book by Gerald Bray. It was published in the 90s. It's
Anglicanism or Reformed Catholic?
no, it's
Or-
no, it's called Documents of the English
Oh, okay, okay,
Church, I think. Or maybe
okay.
Documents of the English Reformation. That book has like the 10 articles, the 13 articles, all these like, you know, they're there, the primary text for anyone to read. It's a good compilation of the source material. Um, Henry's um, the supreme head of the Church of England. He's now married, you know, getting to moving on to the story. He gets married to Anne Boleyn, who is the Queen of England from 1533 to 1536. She gives birth to Elizabeth, Henry's second child. Elizabeth's born in 1533. She would die much later on in 1603. I think Elizabeth would end up being now the third longest reigning English monarch. They were, and I guess women lived longer. Her and Victoria and Queen Elizabeth, the three women who've been
Right.
monarch of England have had the longest reigns.
Hmm.
But So that's Elizabeth's birth and origins is from that marriage. Then we get into I'm just kind of scooping ahead.
When Anne Boleyn was executed because Henry
Yeah.
accused her of having an affair, and so he
Hmm.
had her beheaded at the Tower of London, right?
No, it was Tower of London. I saw her tomb. Her and it's really moving actually. Her and again going back to my England trip 8 years ago. Jane Grey and Anne Boleyn. We might get into Jane Grey fast. We did an episode on Jane Grey way back. I want to bring him on again because the audio wasn't good. He knows it too.
Yeah.
Um, the yeah, I was at it was at the Tower of London. It was at the St. Peter's Chapel at Tower of London, and in that is there under the chapel there. There's tons of like people who were executed there. A lot of them are interred in there. But right under the altar, Anne Boleyn and Jane Grey side by side,
Hmm.
kind of like the two main graves in there. It's really moving to see that. I had no idea. Like I've always been into the English Reformation, Tudor stuff. I didn't know that that's where their resting place was and that they were side by side.
Hmm.
It was really moving, and Anne Boleyn, of course, was from many accounts she was good pious Protestant kind of in the closet because she's married to Henry. I don't know much more other than I don't know any more specifics on that matter.
Well,
Uh,
I think she was one of the ones who urged Henry to translate the Bible. Um,
yeah, could have been.
so she was an early Protestant influence on Henry, and this is something that's in the Tudors a little bit, which is cool.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, Anne Boleyn is the one who started to soften him towards Protestantism, not towards Luther, because he never really softened much
Yeah,
on Luther, but towards Protestantism in general.
yeah. And the show, The Tudors, they were very. I remember that show being very sympathetic to Anne and really just showing the tragic nature of her
They were
death.
more sympathetic to Catherine of Aragon, though, which I felt like was a little disingenuous, but
Well, yeah, of course you would say that, James. No, I'm kidding. Um, no, I think no, I remember that too. And they were very sympathetic to Anne Boleyn too, and I think I don't know, I never really for me I never knew what the verdict was on that. I felt like I mean were the charges maybe against her were trumped up. I mean
oh yeah, I mean, one of the charges was
Henry could have contrived anything with his of course
if
influence.
if memory
But
serves, I mean,
maybe yeah, sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was but maybe she was sleeping around, but I don't know. I don't know. But
Well, one of the charges was that she was sleeping with her brother.
yeah, yeah.
Like one of the charges was incest, and I don't think there's any foundation to that. It was just
Yeah.
sort of Henry declares it by fiat, and then she's executed.
So moving on to number three, Jane Seymour, third wife of Henry VIII, queen from 1536 to 1537. So not a long marriage. She gave him the son he wanted, his only surviving and legitimate son. Um, and he was Edward. He would later be Edward the Sixth, who would be a very important person for the Reformation in England.
Right.
He'd be king of England, succeeding his father in 1547 until his death in 1553. He left no heirs, and we'll come back to him uh, probably in the next episode, but he's coming up. His marriage to his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, it was even shorter than his marriage to Jane. Uh, that marriage was, I hear you laughing. I can't wait to hear what you're going to say.
Yeah.
January to July of 1540, not even a year. The marriage was the result of a series of efforts. I think we'll probably spend a lot of time on this, maybe the rest of the
Yeah.
episode, because this gets overlooked kind of. And if you're if you're kind of like nerdy Lutheran Anglicans like James and I, this is the interesting period because this
Yeah.
marriage between Anne of Cleves and Henry was the result of a series of efforts between Henry's England and Germanic countries to form an alliance. This had both
Right.
political and theological motivations. Can I read these two quotes and then we'll get into whatever you want to say
Good.
about Anne? There's some fun and sad things to say about that marriage, and then
Yeah.
there's also I'm going to read these two quotes. They're both from church historians. One is from Ian Hazlitt, and I'll put the source if I find it, whatever it was. He says, one long-standing tendency within English language historiography was to diminish German influence, and indeed that of the continent in general, in order to keep the essence of the Church of England English, unquote. The other is, quote, sources other than state records illustrate that neither England nor Scotland was isolated from the Reformations on the European continent, and that initiation in advance of Reformation ideas and convictions did not begin with nor completely depend on royal actions, unquote, Carter Lindbergh. All is to say, both of these highlight how influential the Continental Reformation,
Yeah.
both the Lutheran and Reformed wings of it, influenced the English Reformation. That gets overlooked a lot. Sometimes people speak almost proudly of the English Reformation, like, "Oh, we were so much better than the Continental Reformers. We were like, some of it's that Anglo-Catholic stuff. We're like that third way. We reached this like, balance or harmony or something." Like, no, 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 no. You are literally directly inspired and a manifestation, really, of the theology of the continent of the Reformation. So it's like,
Yeah.
uh, maybe with an English twist in a way, you could say, but let's be fair. Let's do real history,
Yeah.
not mythos. Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
but anything about Anne or Henry or any of what I just said?
Well, so I think that Anne of Cleves is probably the most tragic, um, in
Yeah.
terms of historically tragic, because obviously it's tragic when you have your wife executed on trumped up charges. Like that's pretty bad. But with Anne of Cleves, Henry was not, like the story goes that Henry was not attracted to her, and so
And
he
didn't he
did.
think she smelled funny too? Like he
Yeah,
complained
I
about the way
mean,
she smelled. Yeah.
yeah, and so she she was, a tragic case because of the way he treated her, but also because historically that would have changed the face of Anglicanism. Anglicanism was at the very outset, and really for the first 20 years of its identity as a Protestant entity, was Lutheran in every aspect. But once this marriage with Anne of Cleves fell apart, you know, Thomas Cromwell was the one who put it together,
Hmm.
ancestor of Oliver Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell put it together, and because Henry didn't like Anne of Cleves so much, he had Thomas Cromwell executed.
Yeah. No, it's kind of petty. Well, not.
Yeah,
There's a petty aspect of it. But yeah, the timing does align. We can argue causation or correlation, whatever, but the
yeah,
timing aligns with by the time he divorces Anne, he turns back being he was starting to be friendly toward reforming principles of the church, like having the Great Bible, which disappeared. I mean, a translated Bible that just disappeared after. I mean, they
Yeah.
started to put them in churches, then they disappeared, as well as the dialogue with Protestant Germanic countries, Lutheran
Right.
countries. This all
Yeah.
stopped when Anne fell out of favor. It really does a lot. And of course, we'll get into Robert
Yeah.
Barnes because he dies around then too. There's all this.
Yep.
It's the end of a chapter in the Church of England, in
Yeah.
Henry's Church of England, and it would be characterized by a pendulum swing to the other for the rest of his reign for another 7 years.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I think another aspect of this that's so frustrating historically is Henry was a capricious person. Henry was, you know, a very brilliant ruler, was a scholar in his own right. Um, but Henry was about Henry. And so Henry didn't like Anne of Cleves. And so he cut off, the entire German element of the Continental Reformation, like the Lutheran element, because of his, response to Anne of Cleves. I mean, of course, there's other stuff involved. I don't want to
Yeah.
simplify it to absurdity, but like Anglicanism would be a completely different entity if Henry had just not focused so much on what's in his pants.
So are you arguing that what are you arguing that like in a way that would have carried on to our own time, like Anglicanism would have been much more Lutheran? Because I mean, we both agree Anglicanism is reformational, but
Yeah.
obviously there's a lot of Reformed influence. Are you saying it'd be we'd be very Lutheran now, or like what?
So Henry, yeah, I think we would. I think we would because Cranmer was decidedly Lutheran until the influence of people like Martin Bucer, until the influence of people like Peter Martyr Vermigli, and because of this Anne of Cleves debacle, that opened the door for the Reformed camp to come in, and it's when this happens that Cranmer becomes more reformed in his theological way of thinking, especially about the Eucharist. And that's when we really diverge from the Lutherans.
So you're like a
It's
1530s Anglican
yeah, and that when I talked
in
to
your heart.
Bishop Noll before he was Bishop Noll, when we were in Savannah in February for the Anglican Way conference, I think he referred to me as a Paleo Anglican.
Yeah, there you go.
Um, and I think that's right because for me, I think that Robert Barnes, early Thomas Cranmer, early John Wycliffe, um, like
Wycliffe was
or not
very well,
Wycliffe,
and
not Wycliffe,
Tyndale.
no,
Tyndale.
Tyndale, sorry,
Tyndale was
Tyndale, not
very
not Wycliffe.
influenced
Yeah.
by Luther. We're going to cover that in the next episode.
Yeah, like
His
those are the guys that I think get it right, and I think
Yeah,
that the
he lived
Reformed,
with Luther and Melanchthon. He was their roommate. Uh,
yeah,
Tyndale. Yeah.
and Barnes was a faithful disciple of Luther. Matter of fact, even though this is coming out later, yesterday was the anniversary of Barnes's martyrdom.
Mm.
It was July 31st, if memory serves. But I think that the whole Anne of Cleves debacle sends this in a different direction, and it's a direction that, even though I agree with so much of it, I think ends up going too far. And we've
Yeah.
talked about the Anglican doctrine of the Eucharist, and we talked about where I diverge from that because I end up more in Luther's camp.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is in large part where that starts.
So, for our listeners, we're at time, but a sneak peek into our next episode, this White Horse Sin that James is so antsy to get to.
Yes.
Uh, no, really, we're going to start our next episode with the White Horse Inn because, as you heard, we're going to highlight the continental influence, the Reformation of the continent going on during this time, how it influenced the Church of England and the English Reformation. This starts early on. There is a site called the White Horse Inn. I'm just going to read what the plaque to this day that's on there says. It's in Cambridge, in England. It says, "This is the site of the White Horse Inn, known as Little Germany, where Cambridge scholars debated the works of Martin Luther in the early 16th century, the birthplace of the Reformation in England." And some of the people, Thomas Cranmer, Hugh Latimer, Miles Coverdale, and Robert Barnes, uh, all the earliest of English reformers, all were members of this White Horse Inn. We'll leave you in suspense. Thank you all. God bless. Thanks, James.
Yeah.
This was fun, man.
Yeah.
Overdue, but fun. I'm glad we're doing it now. And listeners, stay tuned for our second part coming out. So after this. So God bless. Take care.